live.
Are we live?
We are
Wow, okay. Well, what I wanted to talk to you guys today about, usually I work with the Iditarod, which is a dog sled race that's held in Alaska. But I thought I would talk to you about something more Norwegian, which is the Finnmarksløpet that is held in northern Norway. So with the first slide, Bill, that's the first slide. There we'll go.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's me. That's my winter gear. It's very windy some places we go. So next slide. I have Georgetown Veterinary Hospital. It is in Georgetown. My wife and I have been running Georgetown for about 23 years. Next slide. And this is our star employee. This is Humphrey, the greeter dog. And so he's very eager. So if you guys want to come down to Georgetown and visit, you will meet Humphrey. Next slide. So yeah, I am in addition to being a small animal practitioner, since 2012, I've been a volunteer field or trail veterinarian for the International Iditarod Sled Dog Race that takes place every year in March in Alaska. Next slide. The race takes place in Alaska and features some of the best canine athletes in the world. This is something I truly, truly believe that they enjoy doing. They're very happy. And I want to talk to you about how we try to take care of them. Next slide. This is another group of dogs. Typically, the teams will have about 16 dogs per team on them and one musher. So you have 16 dogs and one human, and they make a team. Next slide. So the Alaska race, the Iditarod, starts all the way down here in Anchorage and makes its way all the way through the interior of Alaska, goes all the way through here. It's been going on since 1973. Next slide. But I got the chance to go over to Norway and participate as a veterinarian in their race with the Finnmarksløpet. So that next slide. This is the Finnmarksløpet. It takes place way, way north in Norway. It starts in a small town called Alta. It makes its way all the way over to the northern border, almost touching Russia, slips down in there in Finland, touching the northern border of Finland, Sweden, and makes its way back to Alta. The race is 1,000 kilometers long. The Iditarod is 1,000 miles long, so a little bit shorter, but a lot of people say it's a very challenging race. Next slide. So this is some of the places, Alta, Tannebro, Marmans. These were some of the checkpoints that we would have. And each of the veterinarians were stationed at a checkpoint to examine the dogs as they come through. Next slide there. This is a real famous church in Alta, so I had to take a picture of it. Next slide. And it's a really big wintertime activity for the people of northern Norway. It attracts a huge crowd. Next slide. And this is actually in Alaska, but the idea is the same. The dogs are traveling through snow and ice day and night, and we have to be ready for when they come in. Next slide. Here's another view. This is actually again in Norway. And you can just see the dogs as they come trotting up off the frozen river. I think that's the Tanu River. And they're coming up and coming into a checkpoint right here. Next slide. And I like this picture because this was Andy. Andy was one of my favorites. Andy was a veteran, and he kind of let everybody know that he was a veteran. Only he could be in the sled. And so that was his. You guys see, I'm sorry. Okay, very good. Next slide. This is a friend of mine. This is, if you guys buy my book, please buy my book so I can get rich and retire, okay? I talk about this incident. She's laughing at me because I have up to here to my neck in snow, trying to get out of the way. And so next slide. But this is kind of what the terrain in northern Norway looks like. Rolling hills, a little rounded, not quite the real jagged peaks that we see in the Rocky Mountains or some of the mountain ranges we see in Alaska. Next slide. And of course, the fjords, very popular, very frequently seen in northern Norway. They'll jut in. I thought they were beautiful. This is us flying in to our checkpoint. Sorry. This is also in March. So we start in March in the same time. Yeah, so this starts every year in about last week of February, first week of March. Next slide here. And of course, for me, this was just a marvelous adventure, not only seeing a fjord for the first time, but seeing a beautiful display of the Northern Lights. Next slide. So one of the differences here is that in the Iditarod, you tend to have this group of grizzled, older veterinarians that have probably been wind scarred and a little long in the tooth. Next slide. Younger crowd actually in Norway, which I was surprised, but younger people. Next slide. Next slide. And, you know, of course, they care for the dogs just as much as we all do. This is a veterinarian. She's from Spain. And what we're doing right now is before the race even starts, we give the dogs a physical exam to make sure they're okay. And I'll go into a little bit later. They get an EKG, they get a physical exam, they get blood work. We're trying to do anything we can find that would tell us that this is a canine athlete that probably shouldn't run this race. Next slide. This is Jose. Jose's a veterinarian from Spain. I like working in Norway because there was such different people from different parts of the world coming together to do this. So the camaraderie was very good. Next slide. George was from Germany. Next slide. Pars was Norwegian, and he looked the part. He kind of tough guy. That's kind of exactly how he was in person, you know, little words, you know, just kind of get the job done kind of guy. Next thing. And the whole thing is led by a real life Viking by the name of Arnold. And that's Arnold, and that's a pretty typical picture of him always on the phone, trying to coordinate. Next question, next slide there, Bill. So just like in Alaska, at the turn of the century, or 100 years ago, there was very few ways to get around. Dog sleds were probably one of the more popular ways of inland travel during the winter. Next slide. Airplanes hadn't really been invented yet, and those that were not very reliable. Next slide. And then I wanted to talk about this gentleman a little bit. This is Joe Reddington. And I had a book signing about 2 months ago in Juneau, and this girl bought my book and she goes, you know, Joe Reddington's my grandfather, and it was his granddaughter. And I thought that was the craziest thing. But in 1973, he wanted to do something to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Alaska being the state. So he and a lady by the name of Dorothy Page came up with a sled dog race, which they would call the Iditarod. So it had it started with this man in Alaska. The next thing. So with the Iditarod, now this is kind of what I wanted to kind of show, is kind of the differences how the two races are run. Each race starts with about a team of 16 dogs. They're going to go from checkpoint to checkpoint to checkpoint. And each of those checkpoints are going to be veterinarians. This is also a place where they can stop and they can water their dogs, they can rest their dogs, they can let their dogs sleep, and they may even be able to get some sleep themselves. But the race itself starts weeks in advance. In the Iditarod, everything is pretty much inaccessible by highway. We have to fly all the supplies in by bush plane. So weeks in advance, these volunteers are getting all the food ready for each of the teams to go to each one of the 26 checkpoints on the Iditarod. Next slide. They'll bundle them up, they'll get them ready for transport, next slide, and put them in a bush plane, which will fit with skis, and they can land anywhere where the checkpoint is. Next slide. Right before the race, as I was saying, comes a very important part, which is where the veterinarians come a couple days before, and we check out every dog that is registered to run that race and give them a physical exam. We also do an EKG, the blood work, and everything else we can make sure that the dog is a healthy competitor. Next slide. People will then go out and stake the trail. Next slide. The day of the race, people start bringing their dogs in. Next slide, and off they go. And so they're off on their journey of 1,000. It's actually 1,049 miles, 49 miles for the Iditarod, or for Alaska being the 49th state. And oh yeah, it is dogs barking. They are hardly wait to go. They are yapping. And in the background, there's a chorus of husky sounds, of huskies singing because they're ready to go. Next slide. So the race will start, and it goes downtown through downtown Anchorage. Next slide. And one of the cool things they do, if you're ever up there, you can bid on a chance to ride in a sled with some of the mushers. They have what we call a ceremonial start. So Anchorage is a ceremonial start. It's not really for the competition. The competition will start a little bit later, about a few miles outside the city in Willow Airfield. Yep, next slide. Yeah, and there's some people enjoying it, and they bid for this, and this is how the Iditarod raises some of its money as well. Next slide. And once they get to Willow, then the official start comes about. Dogs line up, and off they go. They're given a number. They draw out the lucky muckluck, what position they're going to be. And at 2-minute intervals, off they go. Next slide. Even in some of the more remote parts of the race, you still have large crowds watching them come in. Next slide. This is at Finger Lake. It's a beautiful place. It's remote as well. It's near kind of the beginning of the race, so the teams are pretty well stacked together. And this is one of the checkpoints. So right up here is where I would be. And I'd be waiting for the teams to come in. And I'd go up to the musher and say, how was your run? You're good. Do you mind if I check your dogs? And they say, go ahead. Or if they have to do something beforehand, they'll let me know. Next slide. And this is the dog lot. So we have to park all the dogs, and then we have to examine each and every one of those dogs to make sure that they're healthy enough to go. Next slide. There's a team of veterinarians. Generally, per checkpoint, we have 6. We like to have 6. And sometimes weather comes in. Sometimes you're the only one. But as we go down through here, we're checking everything that we can on the dog to make sure they're okay. Pulse, breathing rate, sometimes orthopedic issues if the musher points it out. Next slide. And of course, it's a time for the dogs to kind of roll and do that. I like that picture because they're rolling. Next picture. So the dog, every time you go to a checkpoint, the musher comes by, they have to have the vet checkpoint the vet book checked. We have to go up and say, yes, we checked the dog, is good to go. And I basically saying he can go to the next checkpoint. I haven't found anything wrong. And they have to present this at the end of the race to show that they did in fact stop at every checkpoint. Where? Oh, okay. So this is at the very beginning. So this is those are the equipment they have to have. You have to have that on board because weather does come up. There's been some emergency places where the teams have gotten lost. You have to be able to kind of eck out, keep yourself safe until you can be rescued, basically. It's pretty brutal, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. So you have to have a lot of equipment. And those are the equipment you have to have. Next slide. The dogs all have GPS monitors. The teams have GPS so they can be tracked throughout the entire race. Next slide. And of course, it's a big television event. This is a time for the mushers who may not be well known outside of Alaska. They're always being followed up here in Alaska by television cameras, almost excluded all the time. Next thing. And this is just a picture of one of my veterinarian friends. She's just checking for lameness in this dog. Next slide. That's me checking the gum color in the dog. We like to make sure it's nice and pink and they're okay. I wish I didn't look so goofy in these pictures, but what can you do? Next picture. I just like the look of this dog. That's why I put it in there. It's nothing but I really enjoy that look.
These dogs all the same breed?
No, these are Alaskan Huskies. So that's a good question. So when we think of dogs, well, I think a lot of times we think of Siberian Huskies, and they're beautiful, but they're also very slow and they're very vain. So these are Alaskan Huskies, and all they have to have is some Husky in them. Doesn't say how much. Some dogs will look like a lab, some will look like a Siberian, something like this. They're generally just different looking, but they all have Husky in them because Huskies have a double coat. They have an insulating coat, and then they have guard hairs, and that will shed off the snow and the sleet and the ice. And then they also have that nice dry downy undercoat. So they're well adapted for their environment. Next, there, Bill. So when at the checkpoint, if we determine that a dog, and a lot of times the musher determines for us that the dog, they don't want to continue on the race, what we call drop the dog. So the dog stays with us. And it's kind of important part that it's kind of different in the Finnmarksløpet. So the dog must stay with us. The team goes on. They're not allowed to replace the dog. And the reason for that goes all the way back to the 30s when they had the sweepstakes race, and it was to keep people from running their dogs too hard early in the race and just putting a fresh dog in. The dogs you start with have to be the dogs you finish with. So when we drop a dog, and the most common reason is orthopedic strains and sprains. We have to care for them until we can fly them out. So this is how we do that. We taking some dogs, they have to go home. They go to Anchorage, where they're cared at a women's prison, and the women's prisoners actually take care of them. And I talk about, again, one more jab for my book, in my book. So next slide. And we put them in a ski plane, a bush plane, and we'll fly them back home to Anchorage until after the race when they're reunited with their team. Next.
Does the vet staff go with them?
Sometimes they do if we're changing out. Usually we'll have somebody with them. We have 3 categories. So white dogs it's just minor injuries. Red dogs are a severe illness, and I've only been in 12 years on one of those, thank God. And then blue is kind of like middle. You don't know. He's sick, but I don't want to take a chance. These dogs was actually from a team that the guy decided he'd gone far enough and he's going to take his whole team back. So we kind of crowded everybody in there. And they seem to enjoy it. Next slide. So some of the dogs, these planes can be really, really small. I love this little girl because I was flying back and she just loved looking out the window. She thought that was the best thing ever. She just was glued to the window. So next slide. So that's the Iditarod. So, we have to fly planes in. It's hard to move around from checkpoint to checkpoint. You have to rely on bush planes, and bush planes have to rely on VFR weather, meaning they have to be able to see. They can't do just instruments. So if we have a problem, we have to stay there until we can get picked up. The Finnmarksløpet in Norway is a little bit different. There are highways at each checkpoint. There are only a few highways up that north, but there are a few, but there are enough, and the checkpoints are located on the route. So what happens in this case is that the teams themselves will have a dog van. And if we have a sick dog or an injured dog, they take care of it, which I really like that. I don't think it's feasible to do it Iditarod, but it's really nice to be able to have a dog that's injured or something, and you don't have to take care of it. You just give it to them. They have their veterinarian or a veterinarian close by. And so when we drop a dog on the Finnmarksløpet, they just go back home with their owners who are following in one of these vans. Same thing though, we're going to check the dogs prior to the race. Next slide. This is what I was talking about, the roads, or this is a checkpoint, it's just off the road. So if we have a dog that we don't want to continue in the race, they can pick up the dog and take him home or take him to their vet. There are all the veterinarians up there know this is going on. So if there were an emergency, and knock on wood, they haven't really had one yet, they are ready to go. So if that were to happen. Next slide. Just more roads. Next slide. I like this because whenever you go to one of the checkpoints, it's a big festivity. So these guys had made this beautiful little ice sculpture garden. Next slide. So what it looks like at night. Next slide. So the beginning of the Finnmarksløpet was really cool because it was such a big event. And they had this little play that they put on, and the bleachers are made out of snow, the stage is made out of snow, and they put on this elaborate presentation right the night before the race. Next slide. And all the competitors come up. It's kind of like the Olympics where they're all carrying the flags. Next slide. Same thing. Next slide. And, the dogs are kind of like dogs here. They're enjoying running and getting ready to go. Next slide. And so this is it where we talked about the day before, where we're checking the dogs, making sure they're okay to run. They have to get our health checked. They have to get our blessing to start the next day. Next slide. Now these are, I think these are Siberians. I think that's a Malamute. I got to tell you about the Malamutes when we come up to the Malamute slide, because that was kind of fun. Next slide. So yeah, this is where we start. Next slide. That's the starting line. Next slide. And the people just line the streets. And as their favorite musher comes by, they're getting high fives and everything. Next slide. And the dogs are, of course, excited to go too. So it's kind of like Alaska, start in Anchorage and then you try to get out into the open where you can go. Next slide. Yeah, so the dogs wear booties to protect them against the ice crystals in the snow, so they're not getting gashes in there. And they also, I found out, make great souvenirs for veterinarians who go around and try to pick them up afterwards. Next slide. One of the racers is going by. Next slide. And yeah, here's your booties. There they are. And so that's what I was saying. The booties really help protect a lot of, most of the mushers in the Iditarod use them. They do provide a lot of protection for the pads and the feet against like ice crystals especially, and rocks, because there's sometimes barren rocks. Next slide. And this is now coming out of the town. Now they're ready to go. They've got the open spaces and they're ready to run. Next slide. And I think the dogs have stalled out there a little bit, or they're waiting to go, but this is kind of what they're doing is they're riding this part of the course now is going through a frozen river. Next slide. And this is a checkpoint. This is one of our typical checkpoints at the Finnmarksløpet. There's a road over here. We have a cabin. The dog lot is here. They come up, stay. We have a chance to go through each of the dogs, making sure they're okay. It's a good question. It takes about 20 minutes for 2 people, to really get it. We try to do it with dogs before they get settled, before they're asleep and stuff. Sometimes we can't help it because it's, there's so many people coming at one time, and we just have to kind of, excuse me, I gotta wake you up, sorry. The veterans know that though. It's interesting. They'll just kind of get up, yeah, and go back to sleep.
Stops, in other words, because it's a race. Or
Nope.
just who gets there?
Who gets there first? Yeah. Now that's good. The other thing though is that we do have that's kind of true, but there are, like in both races, there are times that you have to stop. So for instance, in the Iditarod, you have 2 8-hour stops that you have compulsory, and then you have one 24-hour stop compulsory. You could take it anywhere you want, but you have to do it. And yeah, and they have a similar type thing here. Next.
25 minutes.
They get who they get. Next. About seven. Trot, if they really pushing about 8.
Take 4 or 5 days.
The winners will do in about 7 or 8 days, which is really quick. Next slide there. So we always have the hay bales ready for them to take a nice nap, nice and cozy. And these are just some of my friends, I like to think. Next slide. And then once, we've examined them, once they've rested for whatever amount of time, off they go. We have to sign a checkbook. Interestingly, a dog will fully recover its strength with 5 hours of REM sleep. We need 10 hours of sleep. And these race dogs take about 5, and then the energy requirements have been replenished.
So the only time they stop is 8 and 24 hours, and another 8 hours?
No.
Or do they stop every night?
Stop every night, every checkpoint. And then some will actually stop in between checkpoints.
Where do they sleep?
Usually snow, they'll burrow a little snow. Marshals will sleep in the sled a lot of times. Yeah, or they'll have a bivy sack and a sleeping bag. Yeah. Next slide. Dogs are about between 5 and 8 usually. Oh, well, no, let me say that. I'm sorry. Maybe about 3 upward. 8's getting kind of long in the tooth again. I would say 3 to 7. Most of them are in that 3, 5, 6 age group. Yeah. Next slide. And so these are all the dogs taking a nap. This is the time that is good just to kind of walk around and just make sure that everybody is okay. Just watch the breathing and such. I try not to disturb them at this point because they do need their sleep, and they just curl up. Next slide. So one of the things, the differences between the Iditarod and the Finnmarksløpet is this is usually the kind of place I'm staying at. Next slide. We'll have a tent, maybe a little portable stove in the tent, and it gets really cold in there. Next slide. Yeah. So next slide. It's different at the Finnmarksløpet. because this is where we get to stay. So it's a little bit better. Next slide. Yeah, places like that, they have a little like sauna and stuff. Next slide. These were a couple of the veterinarians I really enjoyed working with. They're both from Norway. They both small animal practitioners. This was my team. So we had a team of us three, and we were at every checkpoint, and it's kind of a hopscotch thing. So we would go to one checkpoint, another team would be at the next checkpoint, we'd go around them to the next one, etc. So we kind of hopscotch, next one. And somebody asked about what breed. Okay, this is a Malamute. Malamutes are not fast at all. Okay, they're very slow and they don't care. So we would be at a race and you'd be at a checkpoint and everybody will gone through and you're waiting and it's like, who are we waiting on? It's like, well, it's the Malamute team. And like, oh my God. Hours would go by and then they would come up, boom, 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 And yeah, I remember asking the musher, I was like, well, it's you're 8 hours, late basically. They go, yeah, they wanted to take a lot of naps on the way here. And I was like, yeah, so they really don't get this race mentality at all. So they're gonna, they'll get there when they get there, basically. So, and but they were so great, so fuzzy. Okay, next slide. And yeah, there they are. And these are actually the racer dogs, and these guys are just taking it easy, seeing the sights. Next slide. These are just some pictures I threw together of some of the dogs. I just love them. I was always worried that they would be, when I first went up there in 2012 to Iditarod, I was really thinking that the sled dogs would be sort of mean or, kind of vicious, kind of stay away from them. And nothing could be further from the truth. They love being handled. They, giving kisses. You have different personalities. I think anyone who's had a husky will tell you they have different personalities. There's some that really like being held and petted, and there were some that you do your job, examine me, and we're done. And, that's fine. You just have to, next slide. So yeah, so some of them very effective, give me a big old kiss. Next slide. So reindeer, 8 reindeer. So I had to take a picture and when we were going by, of course, the American, I had to jump out and I'm like following them with my camera like this. Next slide. More reindeer. Next slide. So I don't know, it's just a beautiful experience. I really enjoyed it. Next slide. They always have right of way with all, not that there's a heck of a lot of traffic up there, but like you can see that snowplow coming in. So they would always have people stationed here just in case, because you don't want a dog sled. It's harder to stop a dog sled team, but especially when this is going on. Next slide. Looks like the beginning slide. All right, next slide. Oh yeah. So yeah, that's, they always just try to, I swear Huskies know they're getting their pictures taken because they're just like, watch this. Next slide. Yeah, that's just another one of our favorites. And like I said, one of the things I really enjoyed working, and I still enjoy working with sled dogs, is that they're from puppies, they're used to being around people. They kind of get the idea that when they're in a race, that there's these guys with this stethoscope thing, these people are going to come up and examine them and kind of manhandle them. And it's just like going through the river or up a hill or a snowdrift. It's just another obstacle that they have to get through to get to the finish. Next slide. So yeah, it is serious. This was a dog that was actually, I was a little worried about. If I remember right, you can see this is the musher. So trust me when I say, the mushers care very deeply about their dogs. And I believe this one was sick. I'm trying to remember if it was rhabdomyolysis or something, but He got a little sick and luckily, we got him and we got him on some fluids. He did great, but you can see the concern that the mushers have. This is not a guy who's looking at the dog as just sort of a tool. Next. And so this was the other good thing, especially like in a case like that I can get him into a sheltered area where we can do more proper medicine. The next thing, just some of the area that we're getting into some of the tundra up there. Next. And again, I just like to show the pictures, how we examine them. It's usually a team. It's pretty cold there. I think that's one of the things you have to keep moving. I made the mistake my first year up there of taking my gloves off to try and palpate better. And my hands froze, I like immediately. And so lesson learned. Next slide. No, usually not, because they get too hot. Even in that cold weather, because remember, a dog's temperature normally is 101.5. So, and these guys, when they're running, they usually don't run with the jackets. They're just kind of there when they cool down and such. It was -20. It was -20 with wind chill. Yeah, yeah, it got really cold. I took this because we were that far from Russia, so I was taking pictures. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. Next picture. And you just, one of the things is the culture. This was commemorating one of the battles that took place in Shortness, which was a major area. Next slide. And in Shirkiness is the world famous ice hotel. They're kind of making it right now. Next slide. This is also in Shirkiness, and I remember the dogs coming in at night. I think it's like 2 a.m. And what I thought was cool about this is the volunteer. It's 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and this guy's not getting paid anything. He's just there helping. So I thought that was cool. Next. Shirkiness. Banda just forordning. I don't know what banda just forordning. I don't either. I'm sorry, I don't. Banda. Yeah, threatening is in Shirkiness is town. Threatening is that. Next question or next slide there. So probably should put this at the beginning, but this is what I was talking about, where the dogs come in and they're being checked. They have to check in and they have to check out. So guy comes in, musher comes in, they'll ask how many dogs are on the team, make sure he hasn't replaced any, although that's never happened. Is there any concerns? There's a veterinarian right with him. And, is there any specific concerns you have with any dogs on your team? And most of the time, this is where you find out about lameness issues. Yeah, this dog is not pulling as well. I want you to take a look. And so the mushers really are very vested in the welfare of their dogs. Next slide. Yeah, at night, so cool. These are just kind of pictures of the dogs, I guess. I like pictures of dogs. So next picture. So verbal commands, he is right, ha is left. In Norwegian, I actually think that's kind of universal, because I think I heard it up there as well. Yeah, and when they want to go, they just go, and they will take off. Next slide. Again, examining a dog. This was actually taken right when you talked about. This was it's really cold, and that was the picture right after I remembered to put on my gloves. This is actually, I think no, this is, it's in Tonabra, yeah. Next question, next thing. My favorite Malamutes, again, wandering into the checkpoint. Not in any hurry, we'll get there. Next slide, and there they are again. Next slide. And I had to get a picture with one, so yeah. Yeah, yeah, I got those in Alaska. Next slide. We try to sleep whenever we can. Sometimes that means, in the automobile. Hopefully not driving. That's bars. Next slide. Next slide there. Yeah, next slide. Just more pictures of us and dogs. Next slide. Yeah, you can see that, this again, next slide. And, next slide. Yeah, so I got these pictures because I want to show just, different conditions. So, it's very windy sometimes and they have to go through it and it's blind. You can see this, musher hiding behind the sled. Next slide. Next slide. The terrain itself is challenging, it's downhill. Next slide. Blizzard conditions a lot of times. Next slide. This one, they decided to go without the musher on board. They're ready to race. Musher's ready, musher's not ready. We're going, you can come with if you want or not. Next slide. I like the fact that there was so much of the community in this. This was a concert they had at one of the checkpoints. Next slide. And just the beauty, the rugged beauty of it all out there. Next slide. That's the fjord at like 3 a.m. Next slide. And some more of our dogs. Next slide. And yep, the checkpoints are clearly marked, not only for the racers, but again, for the motorists. Next slide. Just real quick, this is an area, the indigenous people are called the Sami, or Laplanders. The tradition was built on reindeer. Now the Samis, of course, can go across any international border, with free range, which is kind of neat. Next slide. This person was a Sami and, I met him. He made these very beautiful knives, which I bought from him. Next slide. And this is a typical dwelling that they would have used out on the plains when they're following the reindeer herd. They have houses just like everyone else, but kind of like the American Indian with the buffalo, they would have a nomadic part of their year where they're following the reindeer herd. And this is what a traditional. It could be. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it was really cool. Next slide. This is just a gentleman, just show you how friendly people were. We had stopped at a checkpoint. We didn't really, he volunteered his house. It was a very nice house. Next checkpoint, next slide. And we could actually look out and see the dogs from the warmth of his house. Next slide. That's his house right there, so we could see that. Next slide. Checkpoint, next slide. And there we go. So, very good. Next slide. The finish, next slide. And yeah, I gotta plug my book yet again. Please buy it so I can get rich and retire. I brought some copies for sale. It's $29.67 with tax. So if you'd like a copy, I will sell you a copy with my very own signature on it. Next slide. I can't do any of this without my family. My wonderful wife, Chris, and my son, Spencer, and some goofy guy that hangs out with them. Next slide. That's it, guys. Sure, we can take some question.
And then the second thing is what happens when they need to go to the bathroom?
They just go to the bathroom. I mean, if they're going, yeah, that's one of the things, actually, you're right, that's a good question, because they can't stop, because they'll get run over, but yeah, they just go as they're going. Training typically starts when they're puppies, when they're young. One of the techniques they'll do is they'll put a young dog with an older team, and so they kind of learn the ropes that way as well. Most of the people involved with this, even though there's prize money, this is not like a professional sport. Maybe there's a couple people who can do it, but most people are doing this as just like we would run a race on a Sunday morning, sort of thing, yeah. I didn't see any elk hounds, no. The only elk hound I ever saw was here. When we had it here, I thought it was so cool. Oh, yeah, that was amazing, yeah, with that. So, yes,
Not actually a question, but I just wanted to mention, since we're at the Norway house, that, you know, Norwegians were the first to the South Pole in
Right.
1911,
Amundsen,
and they went by sled dog.
and then they ate the sled dog.
It was really their secret to success in
That's
that
right.
expedition. And they learned sled dogging from the Eskimos.
That's right.
Reading
Yeah.
that. And they went to the pole and back safely, where the English went there.
And
they
died.
skied to the South Pole, and they died exhausted on the way back. Robert Falcon Scott died. They tried to manhaul, they took a very English approach to kind of the way they conquered Everest, is that they tried to take large amounts of people and sort of siege type thing with the pole. So you have large support people, which means large amounts of people to feed and dogs to feed, etc. Or they didn't have dogs. They tried ponies, which did not work at all. They tried a tractor, which also didn't work. They were very much into man-hauling. So man-hauling was you had a harness and you would pull a sled full of stuff, and that just exhausted people. They made it to the South Pole 2 weeks after Amundsen had gotten there, apparently just skiing there and back or on dog sleds. And they didn't make it. They died about, what was it, 11 miles from the next depot, very short distance. And they died of exposure. And it's, you know, now in the halls of the pantheon of Arctic explorers, you know, they're up there because of this sacrifice, but it was an unneeded sacrifice. The planning of it, of the siege type mentality, we're going to take a bunch of people, probably what doomed the Franklin expedition, where the Norwegian approach was take a small group, less people you have to worry about, use less material, less supplies. Yeah, cool. And they learned from the Eskimos.
Yeah, in the Fram expedition.
How do the dogs react when they're taken out of there?
So they don't like it. It's one of the more pitiful things because they really don't want to be away from their pack, and they will cry, and it is heartbreaking sometimes. They just, they'll howl, and they'll fight you trying to go up. Now, they really don't want to be separated. And they're almost like, I can go in, coach, I can go in. But, you know, in some of these cases, you know, we're always trying to look out, you know, for their best interests. But yeah.
What are the type of things that you look for taking the dog out?
The things that I'm most worried about are things that could end up seriously injuring a dog. So if there's any signs of, there's a disease called rhabdomyolysis, sometimes seen in racing horses, where the muscle starts to deteriorate. That's very serious. I had a couple cases of aspiration pneumonia where a dog actually went down the wrong tube. Sometimes when they're running, they'll try to slurp up some snow, which is usually okay, but I had a couple that went down the wrong tube. That was pretty serious. Any injury, and in fact, and sometimes if they're just tired, you know, sometimes the dogs are just tired and the musher will come up, says, you know, they're not pulling well, I'm tired, I'm just gonna leave her here or leave him here. Yeah.
What gender are the dogs?
They're both male and female. Yeah, yeah.
Is there a financial incentive to run the race, or they do?
No, I mean, I think the Iditarod, yeah, I think there's a financial prize. But when you think about how much it costs
to take a dog team up to Alaska, to move them up, all the food that you have to get, unless you're like the Seavies or someone way up there, you got sponsorship and such. You know, I think first place prize this year was $50,000, but subtract from that, you know, the time training, the food that you did training, all this, and then after that it drops off. So like first, second, third, I think up to fifth is 20, and then after that's 1,000 each. The entry fee is $1,000. So, I don't know. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Has no league team ever won a race?
not yet. Not yet. I don't think they really care to. They're fine. They just are. I've never said, I don't know. They were, yeah, so in the old days, Huskies, the Siberian Huskies were usually used for long distance. You wanted a lightweight animal. They're much smaller than you would think. They're like 35 pounds. You know, you look at them like, whoa. And in the old days, they were used for long distance. The Malamutes were more of a draft animal, heavy loads over short distance.
My husband's company was Rostrum Purina,
Ah,
and they were a big sponsor of
Yes,
the
they were.
Iditarod for many years,
Yeah.
so we used to see a lot of his, company administrators going to Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
To present prizes and sponsorships and things.
If you guys get a chance, it's neat. I liked it and it was great. I really appreciate you guys having me here this evening. Thank you so much. And,
All right, thank you very much.
Will you sign it?